Coming to the podcast this week, we have Mike Aidala. Mike is a strength coach, performance mindset coach, and an absolute freak with unconventional lifts and ultramarathon running. We talk about building trust with your clients, various habits and techniques to get the most out of yourself, his path into unconventional strength, and his upcoming heaviest Turkish get-up world record attempt on February 22nd. Not only is he going for this world record, but he's also raising money to help prevent veteran suicide with Mission 22. Be sure to check out his Instagram page at mike.aidala and check out the link in the bio for all of the details related to the world record attempt. Enjoy the episode.
Before we hit the intro music, I wanted to introduce to you guys the Yoakum Strength Insider. The Yoakum Strength Insider is our online training platform that takes all of the ideas that we talk about on this podcast and implements them into a program that is available to you at the touch of your fingers. Our goal with the Yoakum Strength Insider is to create better movers, to level up your life, and to move forward from where you are. We do this in a holistic fashion. Not only will you receive a program that has helped hundreds of people become better movers, you'll also receive access to our app that allows you to track everything, has video links for all exercises, and allows you to be in constant communication with a Yoakum Strength coach. Along with this, you'll get our 30-page PDF nutrition and lifestyle guidelines. That includes everything from what to eat, how much of it to eat, why we're eating it, meditation habits, and other lifestyle habits that we implement with our clients to really level up their lives. If you're interested in trying out one of these programs, use podcast 25 in the discount section right before you pay for 25% off your first program. Boom.
This is the Yoakum Strength Podcast. Take the leap down the rabbit hole with us as we interview elite level guests to unravel what high performance really is.
All right, well, Coach, welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, man. I'm looking forward to wrapping it up with you guys.
Yeah, dude, I was just telling you how I was just brain rotting through Instagram, and I saw some savage put 350 pounds over their head and do like an overhead squat. And I was like, bro, I need to at least reach out. Like, we'll see where it is, but I at least need to reach out and see if I can get this dude on the podcast. So I'm pumped to have you here. I'm pumped to dive into some of your unconventional strength training stuff that you do, but also the as I was like creeping on your page, looking at some of the mindset stuff that you do. And I think that stuff is super interesting. And I was talking to you before where I think a lot of times when it gets into some of the mindset stuff, it gets pretty woo-woo-y with some of these people, and it's like kind of turns into like some snake oil stuff, you know, like where they're trying to just scam people out of money and trying to get and it's like you're not really living that life, right? And I love having the good, and I'm so against that because there's so much good stuff that can go into some of this mindset and performance-based stuff that gets washed out the windows when it's sold to people in that snake oil way, and they throw out all of the mindset stuff because it's not somebody that's actually living it. So it's cool to see somebody actually living it, breathing it, and kind of pushing the good that is there while also living the good that is there. So how did you get into the world of mindset coaching and the unconventional strength? Like what is your background to kind of get to the point that you're at now?
Yeah, well, I started off my career as a coach. So I went to college, kinesiology, exercise science. The New York Jets came to my college for training camp, and their strength staff wanted an intern. And at the time, that was like my dream. I was like, I want to be on an NFL strength staff. So I interned with them for 2 training camps, which was incredible. Learned so much, like straight to the pros. And then from that, I really liked the NFL combine prep type of stuff. So at the time, it was Athletes Performance. Now it's Exos out in California, and I was out there helping a class get ready for the combine. But what I found I started to really like as I moved back to New York, where I'm from, and I manage a strength and conditioning facility there, is I like the space in between the exercises with the athletes where, you know, maybe they're diving into something more personal, like relationship based, or even with themselves, or nervous about going to the league from college or whatever it may be. And I could find that like that's the needle that I could really help them move. And, you know, believe me, I love getting bigger, faster, stronger, all the types of things. But that's where I started to dive more into the mindset aspect and have been really focused on that ever since, along with the physicality too, because you can't have one without the other. But I taught yoga for a long time, and I'm constantly trying to learn different modalities and put more tools in the toolbox. And then when I'm with a client or with someone, I can kind of pull out the appropriate tool that's going to resonate for them.
Dude, fuck yeah. That's a dope. I love that you're talking about how doing this stuff kind of concurrently too, because it's like that's something that you see. It's like it doesn't need to be one of like just talking to your athletes in between sets. It can be so unbelievably powerful. You can have such a big impact there. And I just feel like a lot of coaches are just we're arguing about like Olympic lifts or not. And it's like, dude, it's like, what are we talking about? When like, what's your conversation? Every impact I feel like I've had on an athlete has been an in between rep conversation, never like a during rep conversation. You know, it's never like, I mean, obviously, if they're doing something just horrendous during a squat, you can make a correction there and make a big difference as a coach. But I really feel like the power does come from that personal relationship as a coach in between those sets and reps because everything else is like if you can't program the actual sets and reps itself, like that's just the bare minimum. That is your barrier to entry as a coach, and we should be able to do that without like a 3 hour class on learning about counter movement jumps over there, right? Like you should just be able to do that part. Now the art of it is more so talking with your athletes. So what is your approach to like talking with the athlete? How do you because this is the thing, like when I was at the Division 1 sector, we work with 100 I think we had a 120 person roster before we made all of our cuts, right? So you have 120 total different athletes, all of them with very I want to say similar goals of like wanting to win, but different individual goals, different individual personalities, different individual things that'll make them go. I had some athletes where yoga and meditation were like you brought that up to them and that was their tool. That is what they took. That was like life changing for them. And then you had other athletes where like they would scoff if you started with it. If you told them that some of these analytical athletes to do a meditation right away, they're like, "What the fuck are we doing? We're wasting our time, right?" Like, and you have to like get to them a different way and like work with them a different way. So what's kind of your approach with like working with the athlete in front of you? How do you figure out like what makes them tick and what can actually benefit them to get them to where they want to go?
Yeah, it's so cool that you guys are obviously in the strength sector because I make a lot of analogies with mindset to strength. And if someone wants to get stronger, they go into a gym, there's thousands of exercises that they could do, so many programs, so many people, telling them what they can be doing. And there are certain exercises that are going to be better for them based on their goals or their injuries or the time or the equipment. And it's very similar in a mindset space. So I like to help people solve their problems. So if an athlete or person's coming to me with a problem, then I can help them with certain tools. Just like in the gym, if someone comes in, they want to get stronger, you're going to probably have them do like compound movements. Those are going to be the best at getting them stronger versus, I don't know, taking a 5 pound weight and, just lifting it out to the side. And so depending on what an athlete's coming in with will really dictate what I will help prescribe to them. Common things that I talk about that I see are like feeling overwhelmed, constantly distracted, loss of purpose or mission, confused about where they want to go, lack of self-esteem or self-image or confidence. And so based on that, I do a holistic intake form where I look at their physical health, their emotional health, their social health, all these different aspects of what make them them. And then from that, there's certain triggers and certain things that will move the dial more than others. So I never want to give someone just like a shit ton of homework that they have to focus on and do. I want things that they can apply, which is really why my business is called The Offense, A Life of Action, is I want people to do the things because that's the only way that you're going to ever make any change. And I mean, I could go off on a rant on that, but that's the basis of it.
So with that, how do you get around the hurdle of athletes not wanting to share how they truly feel? Because I mean, it's a constant stigma, like in a weight room, especially like with normal strength and conditioning staff or around their normal coaches. They never want to be like, "Hey, I'm really tired today," because the coach, that might be perceived negatively. How do you get them to buy into your trust or like be able to like be open with you, I guess is the main thing, just because that's a hard thing for athletes to want to do is like, "Hey, I feel bad because of this," or like, "I am in a bad spot because of this."
Well, I think they probably don't have trust, like you said. And so if they say that they're, feeling off or feeling tired, then they're going to be negatively perceived. So you have to get the buy-in from whoever they're scared of to really reinforce that with them. Otherwise, it's all going to kind of be this perception.
Well, I just got caught mid drink. That was terrible. The one thing you talked about is building the confidence on the field. And I get this question, dude, every week I do a Q&A and every week I probably get 5 questions about like how do I become a more confident athlete? How do I like I'm perfect in practice and I get on the field and be nervous. And I feel like this is like just the most common mental toughness question, mental performance question is like how do I step on the field and be confident? And to me there's so many different pathways. Like it's so individualized for what that athlete is. Like you have the high school kid that's just not good enough. It's like of course you're not confident, you're just not good enough. Like we need to go get better. And then but it also goes to like professional athletes where it's like you obviously are good enough. You obviously have so many data points. Like why is that, like why are those data points not clicking in your head? What's your process of like individually diving into building a true confident athlete to where they walk on the field and they can perform the way that they want to perform, and they can kind of like stay in their bodies. They're not fight or flighting on the field when the pressure gets too big.
Yeah, I think confidence comes from the preparation. So the more prepared that they feel, the more confident they're going to feel. And if you're not prepared, if you don't feel confident for a business meeting or a test or a game, you maybe haven't watched enough film or haven't drilled enough on the practice or whatever it may be. So I'd ask them, why don't they feel confident? What is it that they're nervous about? And then start applying different actions to attack, that lack of confidence.
Dude, see, I'm not a fucking meathead. This is a performance coach right here saying the same thing. I keep telling everybody like over and over again. It's like I just, to me, and because the only reason I am so set on this is because I was very much in a, and this is why I talk about the mental like tools. Like there's so many good tools. There's so many like the mantras, dude. I think mantras are fucking amazing. I think like the self-confidence and repeating things and the stories you tell yourself is so important. I think meditation is such a powerful tool, and all these things really did help me in my life. But I was using these things with the false premise of if I just do these things, I'm going to step on a field and become a more confident athlete, right? It's like I was doing these things without just the truth of you're also just not prepared enough as an athlete as well, you know? And like it was like just kind of wrapped up in these three things are going to take away all anxiety. These three things are going to take away or just build enough confidence when you walk on the field. So then I would walk on the field, get nervous again, and then I would lose faith in these tools that I do like believe in. I do believe they have power just because I was lied to about what the tool actually was, right? Like, which is that they're a benefit, but you also have to master that preparation. You also have to be good enough, you know? And like there's so many times where I just didn't want to look in the mirror and be like, I'm just not good enough in this moment. That's why you're nervous. And you should be nervous if you're not good enough, right? Like it's just the body telling you you're not prepared for this moment. But I just think a lot of times we wrap up a lot of woo-wooiness and a lot of magic in tools that are actually beneficial. Like again, I do believe in a lot of these tools, but we wrap it up in these weird stories that kind of sell athlete things to kind of like push our biases on these athletes. And then at some point the truth comes out. And then instead of taking the positive that is with these tools, they throw it all out and they just say it's all woo-wooey magic, like whatever.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you need that holistic approach to it. So, yeah, you can think as much as you want, but if you're not actually out there, taking the reps, practicing, putting yourself in that game-like situation, then you're not going to have the confidence because visualization is an amazing tool, but just by itself, it doesn't set it up. If you visualize and then apply it, then you can get a lot of those benefits. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with positive psychology at all. But it's basically the branch of psychology where I operate a lot of, and it's like things are pretty good, but how do we get them better? What's the science of, peak performance? And flow states is a huge part of that. And I imagine you're familiar with flow states where you're just completely dialed in and focused in the zone, and that's the state that you want to be in as an athlete because now you're not in your head, you're in your body. And to get into a great flow state, I like to think of this as a graph, and on one axis you have your skill, and on the other is the challenge. And so if you're, I don't know, a safety and the offense is bringing out a formation that you haven't seen and you get nervous because you don't have enough skill of recognizing that formation, then you're going to get anxious because that challenge is too high. Versus if they come out with something you've seen like a million times, it's going to put you right into that state where you can focus on achieving what you want to achieve. And so if you are an athlete and you feel like you get out on the field and you get nervous, recognizing what is it that's bringing that you need to increase the skill in, and then practicing what that might be, which in this instance, I'm just making it up. It could be more film reps. It could be getting out there and taking more ghost reps. It could be when you're not in, standing behind the defense, reading it instead of just being on the side bullshitting with your friends. So there's so many different aspects of kind of breaking down what those things are, but recognizing where your skills need to improve and then what is a solution for that.
So I know like as game day, test day, whatever the thing like event is comes closer, people generally who haven't prepared get a little bit nervous and it's like they want those quick hey, what can I do today to like not feel nervous? And that's you're kind of too late at that point. What's kind of the ideal time frame of like working with someone that you can like because it takes time to make an adaptation, just like anyone else would understand that in the body. Like I don't see why the mind should be any other way. What like if you're getting a client and they're like, hey, my thing's in 2 months, like is that a right time or like what kind of time frame do you like to work with people for these mind frame shifts?
Yeah, so the way I run my business is I start everyone on a 2 month commitment where we'll do one engagement per week, and then from that, based off of their intake, I'm giving them certain assignments or things to focus on, and then we can be in contact in my app to be able to make sure that they're achieving what they want to achieve. The goal is to really like invest a ton into those 2 months so they build the tools and the awareness, and then they continue to apply that going on. But I'm sure you guys can resonate with this. Like once you're aware of something and that light bulb goes off, you're like, oh, I can see it this way, and then I can ultimately practice catching it myself, which is the goal, being able to almost like self-coach in some of these situations. And then as things get more complicated or you level up, we can continue back into our coaching container.
Dude, I love that you mentioned like the ability to pick up on like old ways of thinking or old like the branches of the brain where you see like, oh, that's like old you thinking that way in that moment. And it's kind of crazy because that was one of the questions that I wrote down too. It's like you get a lot of these athletes where it's like they have, let's say, 20 plus years of mental reps that like drilled into their head, like, and if you think about like the neural pathways, how instantly like stimulus A leads to stimulus B or thought A leads to thought B for a lot of these athletes. And they have it's so ingrained in a lot of these athletes. And for some athletes, it's really easy because they've ingrained really good mental habits. And then some athletes, it's really, really hard to break them out of like those mental molds because it's the same as like if they're squatting wrong for 20 years, you get them like it's so much harder to fix the athlete that's been squatting wrong for 20 years than the athlete that is just a completely blank slate. But the mental thing, like very rare, like you never get an athlete that has a blank slate mentally, right? Like they've had stories they've told themselves their entire lives, right? How like what's the journey and like how do you go about like communicating with athletes about that to where it's like, dude, you've been thinking this way for 20 years. Like it ideally it doesn't take 20 years to change it, but like it's going to take a long time to get those mental reps for stimulus A to lead to a new stimulus or a new result of a stimulus C rather than instantly going A to B. And going into like the psychedelic world, like I went to a psychedelic conference 2 years ago and just listening to all the neuroscientists, it's crazy how quickly the brain just runs like a supercomputer of like trying to automate everything and try to make everything as efficient as possible. And that's why it does it, right? Like it tries to make you not think about it and it knows the tools it can do to like survive to where stimulus A leads to result B, not because result B is the best, but because it knows it can survive. It knows it can stay at homeostasis there. But now our goal is really to break out of that homeostasis and reach, like you were saying, for the positive psychology, for not just good, not just survival, not just homeostasis, but something above. But to change that mental model, I mean, it's that's all of therapy, right? Like that's all of like breaking out. Like addiction is a big thing they talk about in the psychedelic world, and like how hard that is to break somebody out of those mental models. Like how do you do that with an athlete? Like what are the mental? How do you reroute them? Like for with the 20 plus years of the route that they currently have, like it's a hard process.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of ways to do that. This is where a lot of the tools that you mentioned come into play. Journaling is a very powerful tool because oftentimes we'll just be thinking about something and like mentally masturbating on it. But we're not usually writing down those things. Like you're not writing down, I'm a shitty linebacker. I can't catch the ball. Like you're thinking about it, but you're not like tripling down and reinforcing it. And so this is where like, the work can come into play where you're manually rerouting your brain by like physically writing things down, maybe a mantra, maybe a visualization, a meditation where you're just constantly going after that one thought pattern. And because oftentimes athletes, they are motivated to create a change in that aspect. It happens a lot faster than it was installed. Like this is a lot of stuff that I'll talk with like General Pop on with like the way they were raised with like their just like yeah, making changes with the ways that they think about themselves and their life and if they're successful or not. Or a common tool that I often talk about is taking ownership over your life. And one way I like to do that is through the language that you speak. And so helping people bring awareness to a specific word that oftentimes people who are anxious or nervous will use, which is the word should. I should work out more. I should have a starting spot. I should make more money. I should be dating this girl. I should whatever. Those shoulds are endless and they're constantly being put on us as expectations. And if we're trying to live a life of shoulds, we're living a life outside of what it is that we truly want. And so it might not happen to a high school athlete yet, but later on down the line, you're not going to really know what do Mike, what is Austin, what do we really think about ourselves or the direction we want to go with our lives. And so by taking out that word should, doing what I'll call a should fast, never letting yourself utter that word to yourself or externally. And whenever it does come up, having the discipline to write down what it was. I should, have the starting position versus when you take out the word, you install the words want or don't want, which helps you take that ownership over the language and then over the action. So it would be, I want the starting position. And because I want it, I want to study more film. I want to get into the weight room. I want to focus on fixing my squat. I want to focus on that hip imbalance that stops me from going left when the linebacker cuts back in a counter or running back. Like that empowers people. So that would be an exercise that can really help change that mental model.
Dude, I love that. The reverse engineering of that psychology is super nice. And I like how you talk about where it's not even like all a psychological thing of like positivity or negativity on how you're thinking, but it's like an actual result. It's like I want I want to stop falling for that juke move, right? Like, or I want to stop dropping the ball in these moments where that's not even like a I want to be more confident. It's a much more practical solution or much more practical goal that you can go, because that was my question too, is like, how do you find KPIs for this stuff, right? Like, how do you find progress markers? And I think that's a lot of times why the strength world dumbs it down so much, because it's easier for us as coaches to show a KPI, right? So much easier for me to show, hey, I got 10 pounds up on this dude's squat. Hey, I have laser numbers and I have jump numbers to show I got this athlete better. Where is, well, okay, is that athlete more confident on the field though? Like, how do you have a KPI there? Like, where is that? What are you talking about? And that stuff gets a little murky for coaches, and it becomes, I think a lot of it comes down to like job security with a lot of these coaches, where that's a harder sell. Like, they don't have a solid data point there to be like, hey, my athletes are more confident on the field. But man, if you think about yourself as a coach, like, or even as an athlete, like, when do you perform the best? It's not really when you're the biggest, fastest, strongest. Like, those are all key points, but it's like when I walk on the field and I feel like I belong here, man. Like, I feel like I can make the play. I feel like I can do what I'm supposed to do. Then I dominate, right? And if you want to be a coach of athletes that dominate and you want to help your athletes dominate, maybe we should look at some of these other KPIs. So, like, how do you approach that to give a solid data point to these athletes, a solid data point to a coach, a solid data point to a team that you're working with, to be like, hey, this stuff's actually helping. Like, this stuff is actually important. It's not all just straight number based.
Yeah, you're right. That is definitely the main challenge, 100%. And I think all people will resonate with when you're feeling healthier mentally, physically, you're going to perform better in your job, in your relationships, out on the field. So any head coach or whoever is above the strength coach will understand that that is the case and then be able to see it with their athletes. And it's just checking in. Like, this is where it does get tough, but things like 1 to 10 scales of like, how confident were you this season? How confident were you last season? Did you feel that these exercises or this mindset shift that we put in place helped you show up better on the field, or did it not work? And people from that will give feedback. And from there, you can help make decisions on if this is something that's valuable or not.
And with that, with something not working, something working, do you ever have an issue with an athlete that's like how do you balance with a tool that you're like, okay, like, let's say it's the should versus would comment, like that's like a valuable tool that you have in your system, right? You have an athlete that fights that. This isn't buying into it. Meditation, I think, is a good one too. Visualization, like, there's just some athletes that just don't buy into it, or it's like, dude, if you just like bought into it a little bit, I really do believe this would be a powerful tool. The same way of like you have an athlete like falling for a strength program that's probably not the best strength program, but they saw it on Instagram, they believe in it. It's like, man, dude, if you just did some compound lifts instead of lifting arms every single day, you'd become such a freak. Like, how do you get athletes to drink the Kool-Aid a little bit of the tools that you want them to try? And obviously, we also have this bias too, where we now we're at points where athletes come to us because they know what we do, so it's a little bit easier. So maybe it's like when you're working with, because I think about this too. It's like when an athlete comes to my gym and they know who I'm doing, it's so easy because they already bought in. Like they already drank the Kool-Aid, they're already paying me for what I do. And then I can give them a lot. I can give them a meditation, I can give them a visualization, I can give them a weird exercise, and they're like, yeah, I believe in this guy. It's going to be much easier. Whereas when I was in the college sector and they weren't hiring me specifically, I was just their coach, right? Like, so they're not instantly buying into this. Or I'm working with a high school team that the coach brought me in, right? To where they're not instantly buying into the tools. How do you work with athletes to just taste the Kool-Aid and get the result a little bit, especially a resistant athlete?
The same as you would do anything else. You show them a little bit that works for them and that they can relate to. And that's where the art of coaching can really come into play because you're going to give many different cues or many different explanations to an athlete, to all of your athletes. Everyone's a different person. And so being able to have a bunch of those different tools and be able to explain it in a way that's going to land with someone specifically, that's the key. And of course, if you're talking to a big group, you can't do it for every single individual. So you can maybe give a lot of examples of different types of people and how it has worked for them. But often, I mean, I always ask for feedback, like, because I never want to shit on someone else. I never want to tell you what you should do. I say, hey, this is what I suggest. This is what the research says. This is what the science is behind something like gratitude. Do you feel like you'd be able to give it a try for a week and see if it benefits you or not? And then if they say yes, great, they'll try it for a week. It will work. They'll notice how great it feels. And then we can say, okay, do you want to continue this or do we want to take it down? Want to dial it up? Kind of where are you on that scale? But bringing it in to them in a way that they can understand is going to be the most important part.
For like a strength coach, I know like having the expertise in multiple domains is super important. Like say obviously you're not going to train like a cross country runner the same as a lineman, the same as, you know, like a women's lacrosse player. How do you find that you get the expertise like mentally, and do you need it for like different athletes? Because, you know, they all have their different struggles and the different skills that they would need and the different weaknesses that they have. Do you kind of take like, do your approaches kind of fit easily with those, or do you kind of need some firsthand experience in that sport to prescribe your methodologies, I guess?
Yeah, I don't think so, to be honest, because like athletes are going to move in certain patterns. So, like, a soccer player is going to sprint, they're going to accelerate, they're going to hit max velocity. A lineman's probably not going to hit as much max velocity. So, you can train athletes based on the movements that they're doing. And for people, we all experience emotions. And so, the emotions will be the same no matter if it's in sports, if it's in
Okay.
a relationship, if it's in whatever. So, if you understand people in that type of way and their fears, their doubts, their emotions, then you can coach to that. But I'm never going to tell an athlete what to do with their sport because I don't play their sport.
And this is something too that I think is kind of super cool. It's like the difference between coaching something and living something, or like coaching your own philosophy, doing your own philosophy, and like living your own philosophy. Like, when did you have the switch personally to where like, oh, this shit works, like, oh, I actually need this stuff, and like it makes a massive difference in my own individual life? Did you have a moment where you're like just feeling unconfident and I'm like, okay, I got to go like about changing the story that I'm telling myself? Like, what was that like individual journey to become the mindset coach rather than just like a strength coach only focused on lifting?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I've always been just a very curious person. And I've always been an athlete. Like my mom said growing up, I never met a ball I didn't like. I just love playing and engaging in that way. And what led me more down the path is a breakup, actually. I broke up with a girlfriend like decades ago and got into yoga because I heard, okay, yoga, I'll be able to move a little bit and I'll be able to get introspective. Let's see kind of how this works. And it was really powerful for me. I mean, I laid down in Shavasana, which is the resting pose at the end of a practice. And I started crying. I had these emotions. I was like, whoa, I was like able to do something physical. And then my nervous system was able to relax in that kind of way. And so I became very curious about that and started to dive more into it. And that I studied a little bit with Paul Chek. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with him. He is a holistic wellness coach. He's done many different aspects, but one thing I learned from him is like this idea of subtle energy, and this is where it can kind of get woo, but I'll explain it to you in a way
Oh, I
that
love a little woo woo.
I
Don't you worry.
so, if you're in a room or an athlete comes in and you don't even see them, but you can just feel their energy and you know they had a bad day at school or there's something going on. Versus this athlete that comes in and they're high energy, you can pick up on that energetically. And that's, I think, what we do as coaches. We just don't think about it and put as much energy towards that. But if you did, you could work through like what Chinese acupuncture would be the meridian lines in your body, and you can almost play with the subtle energy within yourself. And at this time, like actually right before I was going to go work with the Jets, I dislocated my thumb. And one of my teachers in college kind of taught me this exercise where you focus all of your attention on the middle of your palms and you hold them together like this. And after a while, you can almost feel like an invisible rod between your thumbs, and you're breathing whatever you want to bring into the world into that spot. So for me at the time, it was a lot of healing energy, and I felt this like rod of healing. And then I went out into nature, which I believe is the most honest place. So whenever I'm wanting to find my own truths or healing, I try to put myself in a space of wilderness. Even if that's like in a city in a park, it can do a lot. And I put all of this healing energy into my thumb, and my thumb healed. Like it didn't bruise, it wasn't crazy sore, and I had dislocated it before, and I was out for like a couple weeks. Like it just didn't totally feel right. And maybe I just popped it back in perfect. Maybe, I don't know, something happened. But at that time, that's when I had bought it. And I was like, oh, wow, there's something more that's going on this human experience than just like X's and O's and checking the boxes. And I'm interested in what that is.
Dude, and then that's something there. It's like those personal anecdotes, and I've had multiple situations, dude. Like thinking about like some Joe Dispenza stuff. I remember when I was looking for my gym, we got kicked out of well, two separate Joe Dispenza meditations. I finished one Joe Dispenza meditation where I at the end of it, I realized I was getting kicked out of my gym. Like it was like I was like, oh, I'm out of this gym. That meditation ended to me opening up an email saying we were getting kicked out of our gym because it was like too overpacked for the strip mall we were in. And I was like, oh fuck. Like that meditation just totally predicted that like instantly. And then the next day I did a dispensa meditation again and saw visually exactly what the next gym was gonna look like. We had like a month to like go find our gym. We was looking at a bunch of places, never really saw what was in my head when I finished the Joe Dispenza meditation, but I had like one day left, so I was like, all right, on my way to go sign my lease for this other place. I was like, it would work, it was perfect, whatever, we're going to it. As I was driving to that gym, I got an Instagram DM from some random person. They're like, hey, dude, heard like a couple months ago you were looking for a place. You were still looking for one. I have one. Like, you should come check it out. I was like, yeah, hell yeah. Like, when can he meet? He's like, right now. I whipped a U-turn on my way to sign my lease, like a 5-year lease to this other place, whipped a U-turn to this other place. And as I walked in, it was exactly what I visualized. Like 2AT, like the color, like everything. I was like, holy fuck. Like, whatever this takes, like, this is where I'm supposed to be. But it's like, that was one of the first times where, like, I saw that woo-woo-iness like instantly come to life. And it was crazy to I just feel like so many coaches like they'll have those like small experiences of the healing of the woo-weeness, but then you have to write it off because if you talk about it, people will be like, "Oh, that's fucking weird. Like I don't want to hear about that." But it's like, dude, there's something there, whether we have the science or the data or the exact analytical thing to like say what it is. There's something there, and I don't think that's something that should be absolutely ignored. I think there's a lot of power there that a lot of times coaches just like I think they get their ego in the way because it's tough to explain. It's tough to not look like a weirdo. It's tough to not look like a full on like movement yogi type person that's trying to sell you snake oil. If I tell you like, hey, dude, just visualize and everything will be perfect. You know what I mean? Like, but I don't think we should shy away from those conversations. I don't think you need to like only talk about those conversations, but I just like even you just talking about that thumb, like I just think so many coaches would have that experience and then never talk about it again, regardless of if it was helpful or not, right? It's like, but as coaches, our whole job is to help our athletes, regardless of how weird it is or not. You know, like if it helps them, and that's our goal.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, that's part of my mission is to like break down some of that stigma that can happen a lot of times with men. I work a lot with men and host like a bunch of men's groups and stuff. And I feel like if we're not able to express ourselves authentically, then that gets held internally, and that can show up in many different ways. For an athlete, that'll show up how you play on the field because you're going to be in your head. Because even if it's at a subconscious level, you're thinking about all of these things that you should be saying and not actually applying, and it's creating a block within your energetic system that then going to stop you from how you show up on the field, in your life, with your partner, with whatever.
And one of the things you continually bring up, the word that you've been saying a lot is play. And the best athletes I know, when they're practicing, they're playing. When they're lifting, they're playing. When they're moving, they're playing. When they're playing, they're playing, right? And the athletes that don't take that jump stop playing. They find some central nervous system block. They find some like psychological block that forces them to not be able to relax and play and create on the field of like movement, right? And trying to allow athletes to stay in that state of play, that state of like creativity on the field is something that I find so much value in with my athletes. And when I see the switch like night and day when an athlete realizes, oh, I'm a confident enough athlete to play and like create on the field rather than be a robot on the field. What's kind of your process of like in creating those environments for your athletes to allow them to continue to play? And because you see it with the best athletes in the world, where it's like they're doing things that have literally never been done on the field. Like, say, let's say Saquon's like behind the like, where he's facing the wrong way, hurdling. Like that dude's playing at the highest of levels, right? Like it's like a recess where he's like trick shotting them, right? He's playing some Modern Warfare 2 quick scopes like Tristan used to do back in the day. But like
Still do.
they're still, hell yeah. They're like, but they have that ability to almost like relax and just create on the field. And I think a lot of athletes throughout their athletic journey, they lose that ability. And I have definitely been there where I've lost that ability. And when I've regained that ability, it's almost a constant flow state is what it feels like when I'm in those moments and I am creating and I am playing and I'm just doing what I want to do on the field. Like how do you build those environments with those athletes to keep them in that constant play state?
I think there's a couple things. Like I'm trying to think of when I felt like I couldn't play on the field. I played Division III football in New York. I played SUNY Cortland. We were on the national championship 2 years ago. But anyway, they I would get in my head because I'm trying to think it's too much and I can't actually like let myself play and make a play. And so what I needed to do was just study more film so that I could when the formation came out, I could read it and then I wasn't in my head thinking as much. But in the gym now with like personal things I like to do, I like to play with different exercises and experiment different movements. And the stronger and more mobile I get, it gives me more tools to play more. So Saquon's a great example. He's super strong, super fast, focuses a lot on his training, his diet, all of his mental aspects as well. So now he has a great toolbox that then when you put him in the game, it allows him to play because he's focused so much on that. Oftentimes, when people don't feel like they can play in their life, is when they're too much in their head. There are too many, again, those expectations on them of the way that they should show up. And that's actually the first question on my intake form is, what's your relationship with fun and play?
Mm, nice.
Oftentimes, I'm talking with athletes or general pop people. They're like, man, I can't even tell you the last time I played. And so we get to practice playing. What does that even look like? What are things that you could enjoy? And yeah, it can be sports, but oftentimes it could be cooking, like playing with recipes, play cross kind of examining through different aspects of your life can help bring out that creativity and play in others.
So actually going off that, for the first time in my life, I had seen, so I work with like the D1 women's lacrosse team. And for the first time in my life, I saw coaches blow a whistle and like I thought they were going to be mad at the athletes. And their reaction was, guys, we are not being creative or having any fun out here with our drills. Like, let's get creative. Let's literally play through this. Like, I don't care if we're missing these shots. Like, let's play here. Like they literally used those words like 3 days ago. And you could see an instant shift in, because everything's being managed, like every shot they're taking. And like they had so much more fun in the next 15 minutes. They took some crazy shots. And then in their game yesterday, there was probably three of their like 11 goals that were absurd. Like shots that like should never have went in or like most people would never take, but like they were confident taking them because that coach had actually like to the athlete's benefit had like incentivized going out there playing and getting after it. And then something else you said too, they also have been getting kind of more into, taking a deep breath, relaxing and like building off each other. Like there was a media timeout during a stressful portion of their game and they all like put a hand on each other and like the coach didn't even say anything for the first 20 seconds. It was like, hey, all right, 5 deep breaths. Like let's visualize what we need to do before we talk about it. And like they all did it. They had the team captain say what they need and the coach was like, that's exactly what I was going to say. Let's get it. And it was just like such a cool thing as a coach, not having their ego get in the way of their team's success.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I mean, that's really the key is empowering people to feel their most confident self. I know that kind of seems corny, but it's really the truth because that's when we're going to operate in all areas of our lives the best. And it's not going to work out. You're going to miss shots, you're going to mess things up, but by being able to go all in, you're one going to keep yourself safe, at least in a physical realm. Like if you're doing a max power clean and you like kind of hesitate on it, that's when something bad can happen. Or if you're going to hit someone and you hesitate right before you hit them, that's when something bad can happen. And two, you're going to allow yourself the ability to learn that because that's the only way you're going to grow is when you fail, being able to remember why you failed. And if you went for something 100%, you're so present that your brain is working at the best capacity that you're going to be able to remember why that was and then make the change in the future.
Dude, and I love your thought process too of like having the tools to be able to do it. And you talk about some of the unconventional stuff you're doing, and that is one of my biggest benefits to me of like using some of the old school like old strength training methods. Do hitting even if it is just a zerter, like or like some gymnastic type movements, teaching an athlete how to do a flip, teaching an athlete even just a basic roller, a cartwheel. One of the things that I have found consistently is like it's not necessarily teaching them how to do a cartwheel is going to create a better athlete on the field, right? Like my football athletes, if they're hitting a cartwheel on the field, it better be for a sick like touchdown celebration. Otherwise, like why are we hitting a cartwheel on the field? But what I have found is it gets them in this mindset of, oh, I wasn't able to do this before. Oh, I didn't have this tool before. I spent a little bit of time and now I have that tool. Now I'm able to do that. I am capable of developing these tools, right? And it gets that mindset of what else am I capable of doing? And dude, once that flip is switched for an athlete, it's such a night and day difference of like how easy it is to coach them because now they're just addicted to that process and they've proven to themselves like if I can do a backflip, why can't I teach myself how to read like the zone read? Why can't I teach myself how to do a spin move on the field? Like and that has been like the game changer in a lot of this unconventional movement stuff that we do. And I think the injury prevention is a big piece. We were talking about the hesitations, like getting athletes out of the hesitation of, oh, I'm going to get hurt, right? Oh, I need to move correctly rather than just like accomplish the goal that's in front of you and proving to athletes through thousands and thousands of reps in weight room. And I do believe that is the beauty of a weight room and a training center is you can play there and the failures there are so much less criticized than doing that in front of 20,000 people, doing that in front of 40,000 people, doing that in front of even like a head coach. Like, because I think a lot of times practice at the higher levels, at the Division 1 level, like there's so much pressure on the coaches. Like, it's cool to hear that story about Tristan, but I've not seen that a ton in like high level athletics of coaches.
I'd never seen it before in my life, and it was like I was like, whoa, that was sweet.
Super cool because usually it turns into the athletes are struggling, the coach screams, the athletes become more constrained because they don't want to fail, right? And then not failing becomes the only thought process. And instead of practice turning into this potential to enter an exponential gain of athletic development, it turns into holding on to that which you know keeps you alive and that which you know keeps you on the field because there's so much pressure and then the growth is gone, right? And to me, it's like, man, the whole point of practice should be that growth piece, right? They should be that piece to prove to the athlete that they are capable and they are able. And that's what I found the beauty of like in the private sector, being able to like prove to these athletes they are capable of these movements they weren't capable of before. And then applying that to the field of play, man, it's such a magical like flip switch for them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, you got to earn the confidence. And so I think it's cool, Tristan, your story where the coach just installed, go ahead, fail, take the crazy shots, do the craziness, get out of your system a little bit, and now let yourself play in the game. And then some of that carries over because it's not all bad. But if you don't even give yourself the opportunity to try it, then it's going to be held in and you're going to play with that restriction.
Can you give us a case study of somebody that you've worked with and like a problem they came to you with, like and how you worked about that problem and some of the KPIs, like a realistic one? I think a lot of times I get into the woo-woo too much and never actually get into like diving into like an actual like, okay, this is actually what we did with an athlete. Do you have any that like come to mind of an athlete that you worked with? It was like he came to me with this problem, this is what we did, and when he steps onto the field now it's totally different.
Yeah, so I don't work with so many athletes at this moment, but in the past I used to. And there was a one who he was a lacrosse goalie and he got injured, tore his shoulder, and his whole identity was focused around being an athlete and with his friends. And so if we look at this like wellness wheel where we look at all of his health in all these different areas, he had poured all of it into his physicality and his friendships. And when you take those away, he had a real loss of identity of like, who am I? How am I supposed to show up? What am I like supposed to do as I'm playing college lacrosse? And we helped him build up these other areas of himself and show that he can now like support his team even though he's injured. He can still show up. He can still be there for them. And it really increased and gave him more tools for that when he came back as a goalie to then star and do really well with his teammates because he develops different aspects of himself. And he did a lot of meditations, a lot of journaling, a lot of breath work. And by a lot, I mean like maybe 10 or 15 minutes a day, not a ton. But it did really show him that, there's going to be times when you're injured. There's going to be times when you can't control the outcomes of stuff, but what can you control? And then how will that show up, excuse me, later on in your career?
Hell yeah. All right. I want to shift the second like part of this podcast to some of the crazy things you're doing yourself, dude. And I think that's why it makes it all sick. It's like, again, we could bring on some movement yogi that is like 120 pounds, never done anything athletically, and is just telling you to stay positive. But we're bringing on a savage here, dude. Again, the first video I saw of you, you were overhead squatting 350 pounds. What is your like own personal pursuit of fitness right now? And how did you develop like becoming such a freak?
Yeah, man, I like to play. Like what we're talking about, I like to explore what's possible. I get inspired by different things, and then I like to test the limits. I do believe in like pushing on the end ranges and then sometimes settling in the middle. But if you don't push to what's possible, then you don't know. And so my athletic background is pretty varied. When I was in high school, I was a quarterback and a corner, and I was really good at in space and like reading the ball and getting interceptions. But when I went to college, they were going to put me at middle linebacker. And so I looked on the roster, and all the middle linebackers were like 250 pounds, 240 pounds. I was 190 pounds. And so I was like, fuck, like I got to get bigger. And one of my buddies was working out with this guy in his basement doing weightlifting. And I never knew what weightlifting was, but I went there and it was some like Mr. Miyagi stuff. Like this guy would go into his basement. There's just a platform, like some old school, just like bar racks, and then a couple bars. And all of his weights were like in his crawl space, and they were all Eleiko and foreign plates I'd never seen before. And I was like, kind of thought they were crappy because I had no idea. And there's just a metal chair. And so for the first 2 months, he just had me use a dowel and the bar and work on different positions. And he would like hit me in different spots to like get my chest up and create tension and pull the bar and pull the feet and focus and breathe and brace. And then the third month, and that was just with the lifts. We were squatting and benching and pressing and all the other stuff. By the third month, I wound up clean and jerking 315. And just from building that foundation. And so that really taught me like the importance of tension and technique. And so from that, I've done like I used to do a lot of yoga, I used to do a lot of partner acrobatics. That got me into hand balancing. And now that's got me into the odd lifts. I'm a big fan of like the physical culture, which is basically the term for health and wellness that originated in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Like what brought training and weightlifting to the world was really through like European circus. And so guys like Eugene Sandow would go from town to town, challenging other people and developing this culture of physicality. And so they would do certain types of lifts. And I found it's fun to research that and to learn what they were doing. There's this one lift called the bent press, which is you hold a weight by your side and you kind of bend down and get under the bar as you're locking it out and then stand up. A lift that I really like is called two hands anyhow, where you have two separate, basically the rules are you have to hold two or more separate weights locked out overhead, and you can do it any way you want. That's just how you have to finish. And so I used to like clean and jerk a bar, move to one hand, bend over, pick up a kettlebell, lift it up. Recently, I've done a Steinborn squat, which is Milos Steinborn, like he's a grandfather of weightlifting, and you put it on the side and come back in. Then you jerk that overhead, put the hand to the middle, pick up the kettlebell. So for me, it's like thinking, what are these? And then within that, like there's no competition necessarily for that. Like I'll make up competitions in my own head, like Michael Jordan style. But it's it's fun to see, okay, what's the best way I can get a bar overhead? I like to use the axle bar instead of a barbell now because it's a little bit bigger. So I'm going like 300 plus pounds overhead, and that on this like one little spot in my hand is painful. So the axle bar is a little bit easier, but it's harder in other ways. So kind of coming up with different puzzles and then figuring out what's the best way to train for those puzzles has been fun for me.
Yeah, I was gonna say that the reverse engineering of that has to be pretty sweet, and I would like to know your process of because it especially when you're going for like a world record, which you are, like it's not been done before, right? Like that's the whole point. It's a world record. Like you are actually breaking through a barrier. What has been your process of like, oh, I struggle with this portion of this lift. I need to build this up in a certain way. Like how have you gone about like reverse engineering this journey of hitting these world records?
So fun, man. I love that we can chat about this because you're right. I talk about it with my girlfriend, but she's like very supportive. And it's different, you know? So, I'll use a lot of negatives. So the record I'm going for is Turkish get up, max weight from the ground, overhead, and then back to the ground, and you have to like secure it before you put the bar down or the weight down. And so the current record is 200 pounds. And the most I've done in training is just over 240 pounds. So like about 110 kilos. And there's a lot of different aspects of that movement because you have to, get over to the elbow, get onto the hand, get to the lunge, lunge it up. The lunge has honestly been one of the hardest parts because it's the same arm, same leg forward, dead stop lunge. And so I'm pretty strong in these weird ways, but like I can't back squat 500 pounds. So my lunge is like that's a heavy, just regular lunge for me. And then to do it at the bottom, with the weight overhead, figuring out where my most mechanically advantageous position is with my feet, that's taken a little bit of time. Where the bar is on my hand, like how much I can rotate it to then push up. Obviously, breathing and bracing for that one push, how much back leg, forward leg I'm using. That's been one that's been hard. But the negative, I think I said that was really helpful too. So like getting a heavy weight up overhead. Like the other day, I just did 300 pounds overhead and then reversed the Turkish get up back down.
Hell yeah, that's sick.
So, but I had to learn. It's like the first time I ever did that, at the very end, the bar came forward and I've never done it before. So I didn't think like, oh, fuck, like this bar's about to land on my hips, which it did, and it hurt. And so now I'm like, okay, how can I do this, but not hurt myself? And so I use the wagon wheels, like the big strongman wheels. So now if it does fall there, it's not going to hit me.
Yeah, that was kind of brings me into my question, like how do the fails look for this, or like how do you like almost get over that mental aspect of failure because you're doing some pretty crazy lifts, and to the untrained eye like myself in those lifts, they look pretty risky in terms of like not the movement itself, but like the potential for failure. Like you're just in a crazy position with a lot of weight above your head or above your back in a weird way.
Yeah, this is where it's like it doesn't feel crazy to me because I've been doing it and because I know what's allowed. But I could definitely see if someone's never done that before, it looks crazy because it would be crazy for them. But my attunement to where that bar is and where my hand is it's actually really safe because I've never dropped a bar on myself besides that one I just told you about. But I have failed at Turkish get-ups or overhead squats, but I don't go from like 100 pounds to 300 pounds. I go from 100 to like 110 to 120, and I start to develop the strength within that uncomfortable pattern. And that strength, again, that's what we were talking about before, breeds that confidence. So then when I come in, my nervous system's ready to rock and roll.
And what's your training program look like weekly right now? Like how much of it is this untraditional, unconventional like overhead squats and doing that, and how much is a traditional like maybe we're hitting some bodybuilding spits that build up some hypertrophy. Maybe it's just some basic squats and like shoulder press stuff that like build up general strength. Like what's kind of your approach to getting after this like world record? Like well, what's the program look like right now?
Yeah, so I mean the record's coming up pretty soon. So tomorrow will be my last like pretty heavy day. Then I'll do another like technique kind of fun day on Tuesday, and then Saturday I'll hit the record. But the thing with all of these lifts and what I just like doing in the gym is I like putting my mindset on and like just going hard. And so I can't do that every single day. My nervous system needs time to recover. So I usually train like 2 to 4 times a week. But when I do, I go really intense. And I love the yoke. I love like overhead carries on the yoke, Zercher carries on the yoke, front rack carries on the yoke. I like to do a lot of Zercher squats, lunges. Been adding in a lot of lunges for this one because of that lunge position. Let's see. My lockout's pretty good, so I don't need to focus so much on that. But like getting the bar up in the beginning and then transitioning the hand, it's a lot of skill work. So I usually do like 1 or 2 skill days per week where I'm just practicing that skill. And then the other 2 days, I'm trying to build as much strength as I can.
Dude, I love that the way that you think about that too, because I get the question a lot about like sports specific exercises and stuff, and that's been my biggest like rant that I've been going on recently with all of my YouTube videos is it's like you got to let the sport tell you what you need to focus on, right? Like you got to the point where it's like, okay, lunges are my limiting factor. I need to go build up lunges, and I think a lot of times mobility is a big piece here, speed work's a big piece here, where a lot of times athletes like there's so many things they think they need to do. It's like train generally, right? Like get all of our general stuff done, go play the sport, figure out or sport skill, whatever you're doing, and then let that dictate where you need to spend more time, whether it is technique work, whether that is the specific lunge work, right? But I think a lot of the athletes, and I think it's the age of information that we're in where everybody's telling you need to do 12 different things, otherwise you'll never be an elite athlete. It's like I think we need to dumb it down, or not even dumb it down, but simplify it and reverse engineer it a little bit more. And I think when you get into that thought process, training becomes pretty simple, right? Like do all the general things you need to do and then spend more time on the things that you suck at. And that could be mental, that could be the film, or that could be speed work, or it could be like the lunge work like you're talking about.
100%. Yeah, you got to know kind of where your skills are lacking and then apply the correct program for that. And also think there's, like you've been saying, there's time for fun. Like, if you're great at doing one specific exercise and that brings you a lot of fulfillment, don't take that out just because you're really good at it. Just don't make it the main thing.
100%. Tristan, do you have a question?
Oh, yeah. So I think one thing that I liked how you said you did all these different exercises. And one thing I've been noticing a lot is, and even in myself, I had the revelation the other week, is that like a lot of people's aversion to a specific test or a specific exercise has been their inability to do it or them not being good at it. And just the other day, fiance Jill, she is not very good at front squats and she's actually doing the hypertrophy clusters.
She's driven a
And
Jake Turo program. Let's go.
yeah, and she like set like 7 or 8 after like 3 weeks. She like finally clicked on it and like texted me mid gym like, "Hey, I'm getting this," and like they're sweet now. And it was like, "Oh wow, like you just didn't like front squats, because you weren't good at them." And like I've looked back at like different testing and different like exercises I've done, and it's cool to hear like you do all these other things that not necessarily pertain to this, like Turkish get a world record, but they're general training adaptations and they work. And you just vary it quite a bit to get what you want. And you're not limiting yourself because like, oh, I need to do a back squat or I need to do this. You're kind of pretty open-minded. And I thought that was just a cool point.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, man. I mean, I love finding out what's the best way to build strength, and then I really like focusing on skills. Like I'm a big fan of the gymnastics rings for upper body. Like if I can do like a bunch of strict muscle ups and ring routines, my bench press is going to be high, and so I'm going to have strong shoulders and safe shoulders and all those types of things. But if I just do bodybuilding hypertrophy stuff, I might not be as safe in my shoulder girdle and might not be able to do those types of skills. And so for me, it is hard to do like what I would call this, which is just like, general squats and training. And I like to mix it up. And I can do it for a certain amount of time, but like for a whole year of doing something like that, it wouldn't be interesting to me. I'd lose my motivation. And which I don't think is bad. I think it's just I would need to switch up and do something a little bit different, which could mean like, adding some pauses, adding chains, doing some more nervous system demanding exercises, but finding out what's the best bang for your buck, where some skills are needed, that's going to be my sweet spot. Like I said, the gymnastics rings, hand balancing is another one I really like strict handstand push-ups, different skills there. It teaches you a lot of body tension that then when you go to like a Zercher deadlift from the ground, you understand how to brace in that like posterior position. So you're really safe, your spine's safe, and you're getting a lot of that core adaptation as well.
Dude, the handstands are one of the coolest ones. Like once you get it, I remember I was doing like handstands, messing around with them. I took like 2 weeks off. And I came back and just randomly ripped a handstand and was able to hold it way longer than I've ever been able to do it before. And I just found a weird balance point in my hand. And like once I found it, I never lost it. It was such a crazy like light bulb like moment of that balance point. It was like everything we talk about of like you have to show up linearly in your training, but it's not necessarily the linear process you're always chasing. It's like there's light bulb moments, man, where things just change and that tension makes sense to you, that balance makes sense to you. And I think the more opportunities we can provide for our athletes to get those moments of those exponential gains, I just think it allows them to like realize what we're actually chasing in training. It's not necessarily always the linear game. You have to play the linear game for those exponential moments of finding the thing that we're trying to find and whatever that is for that athlete, because it's not always the same for every athlete, but when they find it you see it in their eyes and you're like, oh, you did something there, that was a light bulb moment for you. And I think just that's the criminalness of like most strength conditioning programs is we don't give them a lot of opportunities to do that. There's just such a basic like three exercise program and it's the only thing we do. And even simple things like adding a band or adding a chain to a bar where like it can completely change the motivation for an athlete to go do the same exact exercise. The whole goal is to get them to squat, man. Like, why can't we find ways to motivate them to go squat or get them to feel these things in the squat and get them to chase some of these almost like Joel Smith talks about the feminine side of training, like those feel-based things, but it's like the macho world of strength conditioning doesn't want to talk about any of those feel-based things. But it's like if I have an exercise that an athlete enjoys, I don't care how weird that exercise looks or how goofy it is. It's like they have something there and they're a really good athlete. They have a PhD in their sport. There's something there that is helping or clicking for them. Why am I taking that away from them because of my ego and what it looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question for everyone to ask themselves. Why are they doing the things that they're doing? But yeah, I love what you mentioned on that. Like adding in some type of skill, some play into the workouts is really important. And yes, you do need to, the more strength you have through those linear progressions, the more you're going to be able to play. Like I was working on this handstand push-up. It's a 90-degree handstand push-up. So you're in a handstand, you lower all the way down until you're basically like hovering an inch off the ground, like your chin and your feet, and then you reverse and you push back up. And I weigh 240 pounds now. And so like I think the heaviest I've done was like 230. But in order to come down to that, your wrist is like super far forward. You have to push in that really uncomfortable spot, and you have to maintain a bunch of core tension through your glutes and through your hamstrings to like hold the legs up. And so for me, I'm like, that's a sick skill. I never think I'd ever be able to do that. What are the things I need to work on in order to let that happen? Go through a few progressions from that for a few weeks. Then I practice a skill. And before you know it, boom, I'm doing 90-degree handstand push-up.
Hell yeah. Tristan, did you have a question? Otherwise, I got
That's you go ahead.
awesome. The one thing before we go, and this will be kind of the last practical thing of the podcast, I just want to end with. We have a lot of high school kids listening, high school, like young college. They're listening. What would be your recommendations to get into this mental performance model? Things they can implement as they're listening to this podcast or right away after this podcast to better their mental game or be more aware of their mental game, or at least start to touch on these things, start to like again tease it. Like do you have a system or a model or things that you think these young athletes can start to implement today to better their confidence on the field, to better their mindset in life?
Yeah, 100%. So there's this institute called the VIA Institute of Character, and they studied if you were like a build-a-player on Madden and you could install into someone's character like more love or hope or courage or confidence, what characteristic would give them the highest kind of feedback for being overall well-being? It was hands down like scientifically shown on standard deviation to be gratitude. So if you're truly feeling grateful for your life, the opportunity that you have to practice, what your body can do, your friendships, all of these things, you're going to feel better about your life. And so I know gratitude gets so much, there's so much like gratitude journals and things, but this is the one that's resonated with me the most because just writing down things I'm grateful for doesn't really hit like I'm grateful for my body and the sun and my food, but like those don't land as much. But the one I like is called the four W's. So you write down every day three things, what went well and why. And the why is really important because it helps you take ownership over the positive things that are happening in your life. And over time, you start to say, oh, wow, I'm in control of how I feel about things. And I can move my perception from maybe more negative if I lost a roster spot to more positive for the opportunities that I have to then come back and train and get my starting position back. And those can be a huge difference maker for a lot of athletes. So really focusing on the why. And I'll give a quick example like what went well today with this podcast. Why it went well was because I put myself out there. Austin reached out and we got a date on the calendar right away. I ate breakfast before. I got a good night's sleep. I was able to show up and be as present as possible. That's the reason why it went well versus like, it was just a good podcast and I'm grateful for it.
Dude, fuck yeah. That's a banger way to end the podcast. I appreciate you, dude, and your energy that you brought to the podcast. This is awesome.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you guys for listening. Keep chopping wood.
Thank you for listening. Join us next week as we dive down another rabbit hole. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star rating. Follow us on Instagram at Austin Yoakum to stay updated on future podcast guests. Keep chopping wood.